James Matthews stood at the window of the space station, looking at the strange purple and green ships floating outside. 5 years had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Alliance, but he still couldn't get used to how alien everything looked. His reflection in the window showed a tall man with short brown hair and eyes that had seen too much during his time as a Marine Scout sniper. "Mr. Matthews, they're ready for your interview," said a voice behind him. James turned to see a blue-skinned alien holding a tablet. The alien's thin arms and large head showed that it came from a low-gravity world, like most species in the Alliance. James nodded and followed the alien down the bright white hallway. His heavy footsteps echoed differently from the alien's light ones. That was part of the problem. Humans were Deathworlders, born on a planet with high gravity and harsh conditions. Most aliens thought this made humans too dangerous to trust. The interview room had 3 aliens sitting behind a long desk. James recognized their species: a tall, thin verdant with green skin, a short, round Nexian with 4 arms, and a floating Orcs that looked like a cloud with eyes. They were the hiring board for Galaxy Shield, the biggest private security company in the Alliance. "Please sit down," said the verdant. The chair creaked under James's weight, another reminder that most things weren't built for humans. "Your combat record is impressive, but concerning." James kept his face neutral. "Concerning how?" The Nexian waved its 4 hands nervously. "You eliminated 53 targets in your time as a Marine sniper. Your success rate is 100%. No other species has such deadly efficiency." "That efficiency saved lives," James said quietly. "Allied lives. Civilian lives." The Orcs floated closer. "But that's exactly what worries us. Humans can operate in almost any gravity. You can survive extreme temperatures. Your bones are like steel compared to ours. Your endurance is frightening." James leaned forward, careful not to move too quickly. "Those are advantages for a security team. Earth is now part of the Alliance. Shouldn't you want the best protecting your people?" The 3 aliens looked at each other. The verdant spoke again. "We've never hired a human for our combat teams. Other companies haven't either. There are concerns." "Try me for 1 month," James said. "Put me through any test you want. If I'm too dangerous, I'll leave. But if I prove humans can be trusted, you open the door for others." A long silence followed. James waited patiently. He knew this was about more than just a job. Humans needed to prove themselves to the galaxy. The verdant finally nodded. 1 month, but you'll be watched closely. And your first assignment will be difficult. Protection detail on the Centauri trade station. When do I start? Tomorrow. Your old spotter, Robert Miller, is already there. He passed his interview last week. The verdant managed what might have been a smile. He said you'd show up. James felt himself smile too. Bob had always been 1 step ahead. They'd been through hell together on Earth, and now they'd face whatever the galaxy threw at them. As James left the room, he heard the Orcs whisper, "Did you feel how dense his footsteps were? Their planet must be terrible." "Earth isn't terrible," James muttered to himself as he walked away. "It made us strong, and someday you'll be glad we're here." His hand touched the sniper rifle case slung across his back. Inside was his trusted weapon, modified for space combat. James didn't know what waited for him on Centauri Station, but he knew this: 1 human sniper was about to show the galaxy what a Deathworlder could do. And he hoped they were ready for it. The Centauri trade station was huge. It looked like a giant metal wheel spinning slowly in space, with ships coming and going like busy bees. James Matthews stood at his post on the upper observation deck, watching the crowds below through his rifle's scope. 2 hours until the trade meeting ends. Bob Miller's voice came through James's earpiece. "Still quiet up there, Ghost." "Quiet as space," James replied. He and Bob had worked together so long, they barely needed words. Bob was in the lower section, moving through the crowds in plain clothes. His job was to spot anything strange. while James watched from above. The station's artificial gravity was set low for the comfort of most alien species. James had to wear heavy boots just to stay in place, but the low gravity made his job easier. In an emergency, he could jump much further than any alien would expect. Through his scope, James watched the different alien species below. Tall verdants walked carefully on their long legs. Round Nexians rolled along on their wheel-like lower bodies. Floating Orcs moved like clouds through the air. And among them all, a few humans looked heavy and solid, like rocks in a river of colorful aliens. Movement at Gate 7. Bob's voice crackled. Something's not right. James shifted his rifle slightly. Through the scope, he saw 3 Nexians moving differently from the others. They weren't rolling smoothly. They were jerking forward, like they were carrying something heavy. "I see them," James whispered. "They're heading toward the main trading floor." Suddenly, one of the Nexians dropped something. James's enhanced human eyes caught it immediately. A small metal ball rolling across the floor. His combat training kicked in. "Bomb!" James shouted into his comm. "Everyone clear the lower level." The station's security alarms started blaring, but James knew there wasn't time to evacuate. The 3 Nexians were pulling out more bombs. In the low gravity, the explosions would be even more devastating, possibly breaching the station's hull. James had seconds to act. He took a deep breath and remembered his training. In high gravity on Earth, he'd learned to make impossible shots. Here, in low gravity, he could do even better. His rifle cracked 3 times in rapid succession. The shots were perfect. Each one hit a bomb in the Nexian's hands, sending them spinning away into containment fields that automatically activated. The bombs exploded harmlessly inside the energy barriers. The terrorists tried to run, but Bob was already there. In the confusion, he'd moved through the crowd like only a human could, pushing against the light gravity with his stronger muscles. He tackled 2 of the Nexians while station security grabbed the 3rd. Later, in the station commander's office, James stood at attention while aliens of different species argued about what had happened. "Those shots were impossible," a Verdant security officer said. "No one could calculate the low gravity effects that quickly." "A human did," Bob said proudly. "That's what we train for." The station commander, an old Orcs, floated thoughtfully. "You saved hundreds of lives today, Mr. Matthews, and prevented major damage to the station. But some will say this proves humans are too dangerous, that your combat abilities are too extreme." James looked the commander in the eye. "Being dangerous isn't the same as being a threat. Today, human abilities protected your people. Isn't that what matters?" The commander was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps you're right. The galaxy fears humans because you come from a harsh world. But today, that harshness made you exactly what we needed." As James and Bob left the office, other aliens moved aside to let them pass. But this time, it wasn't just fear in their eyes. There was respect too. And maybe, James thought, that was the first step toward changing how the galaxy saw humans. "Nice shooting, Ghost," Bob said as they walked. "Think they'll stop calling us Deathworlders now?" James smiled slightly. "Probably not. But maybe they'll start saying it differently." 2 weeks after the bomb incident, James Matthews sat in a small office on Centauri Station, staring at pictures spread across a desk. Each picture showed the wreckage of a human ship. 6 ships in the past month, all lost to what the Galactic Alliance called accidents. "This isn't right, Ghost," Bob Miller said, pointing to one of the pictures. "Look at the burn patterns. That's not an engine failure." James picked up the photo. His trained eye could see what others had missed. The damage came from outside the ship, not inside. "Someone's hunting our ships," he said quietly. The office door opened, and Emily Parker walked in. She was a human xenobiologist who worked on the station, studying alien life forms. Her blonde hair was tied back, and she carried a data pad filled with charts. "You need to see this," Emily said, putting her pad on the desk. I've been studying the biological data from those terrorist Nexians you stopped. Their bodies were changed. Someone modified them to carry more weight, to handle those bombs in low gravity. James leaned forward. Who could do that? Only someone with advanced knowledge of both Nexian and human biology, Emily explained. They made those Nexians stronger, more like humans, but the changes would have killed them within days. Bob whistled low. They were suicide bombers. Someone really wants to make humans look bad. James stood up and walked to the window. He could see Earth ships docking at the station, their crews nervous after all the recent accidents. Something bigger was happening here. Computer, he called out, show me the routes of all human ships lost in the past month. A hologram appeared in the middle of the room. 6 red lines showed where the ships had been destroyed. James studied the pattern, using the same skills that made him a great sniper, seeing the things others missed. There, he pointed. All these attacks happened near Station 459. It's supposed to be abandoned, but it would make a perfect hidden base. Bob finished. Ghost, we need to check it out. Emily looked worried. The station is in Restricted Zone 7. No ships are allowed there because of radiation. James smiled slightly. Radiation that would kill most aliens. But humans can handle more radiation than any other species in the Alliance, Emily nodded. Because Earth's gravity trapped more background radiation than other worlds. Another Deathworld advantage. Suddenly, the lights in the office went dark. Red emergency lights came on, casting strange shadows. The door slid open, and Director Linda Wilson from the Human Defense Initiative walked in quickly. You 3 need to come with me now, she said. Someone just tried to access this room's security feeds. They know you're getting close to something. They hurried through the station's back corridors, using routes most aliens didn't know about. Director Wilson led them to a small ship docked in a maintenance bay. This goes higher than we thought, she told them. Admiral Hayes sent me. He's been watching too, gathering proof. Someone in the Alliance wants humanity gone, and they're willing to kill to make it happen. James checked his rifle, making sure it was ready. Then we need to stop them. Be careful, Emily warned. The Alliance Council meets in 3 days to discuss removing humans from deep space operations. If we don't find proof by then, we'll find it, James said firmly. He looked at Bob, who nodded. They had trained together on Earth, learning to survive in the worst conditions. Now those skills would help them save humanity's place in the galaxy. As their small ship pulled away from the station, James watched the stars. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, were the answers they needed, and he would find them, one calculated shot at a time. The abandoned Station 459 was a dark shape against the stars. James Matthews crouched behind a broken wall, his breath steady despite the danger. 6 alien assassins had followed their ship here. Now they were hunting him through the station's empty halls. Ghost, they're using thermal scanners. Bob's voice whispered through his earpiece, but they're looking for normal human heat signatures. James smiled grimly. On Earth, he had trained in extreme temperatures that would kill most aliens. He pulled out a small cooling pack from his vest and activated it, lowering his body temperature. Now he would barely show up on their scanners. The station's gravity was failing. In some sections it was Earth normal, in others nearly zero. Most species would find this difficult. But for James, it was just like the variable gravity training rooms back home. A sound echoed from above, light footsteps trying to be quiet. James looked up through a hole in the ceiling. 2 assassins were moving carefully along a walkway. They were Sylvans, known for their perfect balance and silent movement. On their own worlds, they were the best hunters. But this wasn't their world. James waited until they passed overhead. In the low-gravity section, he could jump much higher than they'd expect. He pushed off hard from the floor, flying up through the hole. Before the Sylvans could turn, he had knocked them out with quick strikes to pressure points Emily had taught him about. 2 down, he whispered to Bob. Where are the others? 4 signatures moving toward the old reactor room, Bob replied. Emily says the radiation there would kill most aliens in minutes. They think you can't follow. James checked his radiation meter. The levels were high, but nothing compared to what he'd handled in training. Earth's harsh environment had made humans highly resistant to radiation. He moved quickly through the station, using his sniper training to stay hidden. The reactor room was huge, with broken pipes and twisted metal everywhere. The 4 assassins were spreading out, looking for him. They were wearing radiation suits that made them slow. Suddenly, his boot hit a loose piece of metal. The sound echoed in the large room. There, one of the assassins shouted. They all turned, raising weapons that fired deadly energy beams. James was already moving. He ran straight up a tilted wall, something possible only because of his earth-trained muscles and the low gravity. Energy beams hit where he had been, melting the metal. He's using the gravity differences, another assassin yelled. Spread out. But James had trained for this. He jumped from wall to wall, using the varying gravity fields to move in ways the assassins couldn't predict. Their shots went wild, missing him completely. He landed behind a large pipe and grabbed a piece of broken metal. With perfect accuracy, he threw it across the room. It hit a control panel, sending sparks flying. The assassins turned toward the noise. That was their mistake. James moved fast, disarming one, using him as a shield against another's shot, then knocking them both out. The 3rd assassin fired, but James rolled under the beam, came up close, and took him down with a quick strike. The 4th assassin turned to run. James didn't follow. Instead, he picked up another piece of metal and threw it with sniper-like precision. It hit the back of the assassin's helmet, and he fell. Clear, James said quietly. He quickly tied up all 4 assassins with cable from his kit. Ghost, Bob's voice was excited. Emily found something in their suit computers. Orders, payment records. This is the proof we needed. James nodded as he looked at the unconscious assassins. Good, because I want to know who sent them, and why they're so afraid of humans being in space. He picked up one of their energy rifles, studying it. Time to stop running and start hunting the real enemy. From somewhere deep in the station, an alarm began to sound. James smiled. The real fight was just beginning. The main chamber of the Galactic Alliance was huge, with tall crystal walls that reached up toward the stars. James Matthews stood before the council, his black uniform clean despite the battle he'd just survived. Behind him sat hundreds of representatives from different alien species. These records prove everything, Director Linda Wilson said, standing next to James. She held up the data they'd taken from the assassins. The attacks on human ships were planned by members of the Pure Space Movement. On the giant screens above, images flashed showing the proof. Money transfers, secret messages, and plans for more attacks. The alien council members whispered among themselves, their voices mixing into a strange hum. Admiral Hayes, one of the few aliens who had supported humans from the start, stepped forward. The Pure Space Movement believes that humans are too dangerous to be part of the Alliance. They plan to force Earth out by making it look like we couldn't safely operate in space. But they failed. Bob Miller added from his place beside James. Instead, they proved why humans are valuable allies. Who else could have survived those assassins? Who else could have gathered this evidence? A tall, verdant council member stood up. This human speaks of survival, but that is exactly what concerns us. Their ability to endure radiation, their strength in varying gravity, their combat skills. These make them too powerful. Too powerful to trust, or too powerful to control? Emily Parker asked. She had joined them to explain the biological evidence. The assassins were ready to die just to frame humanity. Does that sound like we're the dangerous ones? The chamber erupted in argument. Some aliens were calling for all humans to be banned from space. Others were defending Earth, pointing out how human ships had helped protect trade routes and explore dangerous regions. James watched it all quietly. He knew this was just as important as any battle he'd fought. The galaxy had to choose. Would they fear human strength or welcome it? Admiral Hayes raised his hands for silence. I fought beside humans. Yes, they're strong. Yes, they can survive things that would kill most of us. But I've never seen them use that strength except to protect others. The station bombing, one council member said thoughtfully. The human sniper could have killed the terrorists. Instead, he chose to save lives. And now we know why they attacked that station. Director Wilson added, it wasn't just about fear. The pure space movement knew that if aliens saw humans as protectors instead of threats, their whole argument would fall apart. James finally stepped forward to speak. The chamber went quiet. Everyone had seen the recordings of his fight on Station 459. I was trained to be a weapon, he said simply. On Earth, we learn to be strong because our world demands it. But Earth also taught us to protect what matters, to stand between danger and those who can't defend themselves. He looked around the chamber. You call us Deathworlders like it's something to fear. But maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs, people who are strong enough to face the worst dangers, so others don't have to. The council talked for hours after that. In the end, they couldn't agree. Some worlds threatened to leave the Alliance if humans weren't restricted. Others promised to break away if Earth was unfairly treated. As James left the chamber that evening, Emily walked beside him. What happens now? She asked. Now we prove them wrong, James said firmly. Every day, every mission, we show them that humanity's strength isn't a threat. It's a shield. Behind them, the argument continued. But something had changed. For the first time, humans weren't just being judged by their power. They were being seen for how they chose to use it. The small ship floated silently in the shadow of a moon. Inside, James Matthews checked his gear one last time while Bob Miller studied maps on a glowing screen. They had tracked the pure space movement to this hidden base, built into the moon's rocky surface. Their security is good, Bob said, pointing to red dots on the map. Sensor arrays, energy shields, armed patrols. But they made one mistake. They built this base assuming no one could survive outside it. James nodded. The moon's surface had extreme temperature swings and almost no gravity. Most alien species would need special suits just to survive for a few minutes. But humans could handle it longer, especially with their military training. Emily Parker's voice came through their comms. She was back on a support ship with Director Wilson. The base's shields have gaps every 3 hours when they cycle power. You'll have 2 minutes to get inside. That's all we need, James replied. He looked at the small team with him, Bob and 4 other human Special Forces soldiers. All of them were Deathworlders, all of them ready to prove what that really meant. Director Wilson spoke next. Admiral Hayes has convinced 3 alien species to help us. They're waiting to move as soon as you find proof that the movement's leaders are inside. The team put on their light spacesuits. Unlike the bulky ones aliens needed, these were thin and flexible. Another advantage of being human. They could handle the harsh conditions better. 60 seconds to shield gap, Emily announced. And James, be careful. Our scans show they have some kind of new weapon in there. James checked his sniper rifle one last time. Time to move. They launched themselves from the ship, using small jets to guide their flight in the almost zero gravity. The moon's surface was dark and cratered, perfect for staying hidden. The team landed softly and split up. In the low gravity, they could jump incredible distances, moving from shadow to shadow. James watched through his scope as alien guards patrolled on platforms above, never thinking to look for attackers on the harsh surface below. Shield gap in 3, 2, 1. Emily counted down. The faint shimmer of the energy shield disappeared. James and his team were already moving, jumping up to a maintenance airlock. In the 2 minutes they had, they needed to get inside and hide before the shields came back up. Bob worked quickly on the airlock controls while James kept watch. The door opened with 30 seconds to spare. They slipped inside just as the shields hummed back to life. "We're in," James whispered. "Starting Phase 2. The inside of the base was built for low-gravity species. The halls were tall and thin, with strange angles. But what might confuse other species was perfect for humans. They could brace against the walls, use the odd gravity to their advantage. They moved deeper into the base, following the plans they'd memorized. Guards passed below and above them, but none looked in the maintenance tunnels. Why would they? No normal species could survive crawling through such tight spaces. Finally, they'd reached their goal, the central command room. Through a vent, James could see the movement's leaders meeting. His enhanced eyes caught every detail as he took pictures for evidence. "Got it," he said quietly. "Sending the proof now." Suddenly, alarms began to blare. A guard had spotted their entry on a security recording. James heard heavy doors starting to close throughout the base. "Change of plans," he told his team. "We're going loud." As security forces ran through the halls, James smiled grimly. The enemy thought they had trapped a group of humans inside their base. They were about to learn that trapping a Deathworlder was never a good idea. Alarms screamed through the moon base as James Matthews and his team fought their way through crowded corridors. Security forces fired energy weapons from all directions, but the humans used the strange gravity to their advantage, bouncing off walls and ceilings in ways their enemies couldn't predict. "James," Emily's voice crackled through his comm. "We've decoded their plans. They're launching a ship with their new weapon. They're going to attack Earth directly." Through a window, James saw a large ship warming up its engines in a hidden dock. His enhanced eyes caught the weapon mounted on its front, a massive cannon that glowed with strange energy. "How long until it launches?" James asked, ducking under enemy fire. 4 minutes, Emily replied. "But there's worse news. That weapon, it's designed to affect only creatures from high-gravity worlds. If it hits Earth..." She didn't need to finish. James understood. The weapon would kill humans but leave other species unhurt. The perfect proof for their claims that humans were too different to be part of the Alliance. "We need to stop that ship," Bob said, firing back at their attackers. "But the dock controls are locked down." James looked out the window again, his sniper's mind already calculating. The ship was behind thick shields, but there was a small gap where exhaust had to vent. If someone could hit the engine core through that gap. "It's impossible," one of his team members said, reading his thoughts. "The shot would have to curve around the gravity well of the moon, pass through the exhaust port while it's firing, and hit a target the size of a fist." "Impossible for most species," James said quietly. He made his choice. "Get to the extraction point. I need to find a shooting position." Bob grabbed his arm. "Ghost, even for you. The math on that shot is what I've trained for my whole life." James finished. He clasped his friend's shoulder. "Go, get everyone out." While his team provided covering fire, James ran through the base's corridors, counting the seconds. He needed height and the right angle. Most of all, he needed to be able to see his target. He found his spot in a half-built upper level. Through a broken wall, he could see the ship below. The moon's weak gravity tried to pull his aim off, but his Earth-trained muscles held steady. 2 minutes to launch, Emily reported. "James, Admiral Hayes says our ships are ready to move in, but not if that weapon launches." James lay down, setting up his shot. His scope linked to his suit's computer, displaying numbers that would drive most beings mad: gravity effects, temperature variations, exhaust patterns, wind currents in the dock. But James had learned these calculations growing up on Earth, where every shot had to account for their world's heavy gravity. His mind processed it all, making adjustments no other species could understand. 1 minute, Emily said tensely. "The exhaust port is starting to open." James breathed slowly, letting his heart rate drop. Through his scope, he saw guards rushing around the ship. The weapon was powering up, energy crackling along its length. 30 seconds. He adjusted for the moon's gravity, the dock's artificial gravity, and the pull of 3 nearby planets. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. 10 seconds. The exhaust port opened. Hot plasma began to shoot out, making the air ripple. Most species would find it impossible to see through, let alone shoot through. But James was human, a Deathworlder. He saw everything. 5 seconds. He took one last breath, then let it out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot curved impossibly through space, riding gravity fields no other species would even notice. It passed through the exhaust blast, its path altered by heat in ways James had already calculated, and hit the engine core perfectly. The ship's massive engines died instantly. The weapon powered down. And in that moment of total silence, every alien in the base realized what they had just witnessed. A human had made the impossible shot. Because that's what Deathworlders do. 1 month after the moon base mission, James Matthews stood in a new classroom on the Galactic Alliance's main training station. Through the large windows, he could see ships from a dozen different species flying past. Many of them now had human crew members. "The shot you made saved more than just Earth," Admiral Hayes was saying to the gathered crowd. "It showed the galaxy what humans can really do. That's why we're opening this new Special Operations Training Center." The room was filled with aliens of different species, all wearing training uniforms. They were the first class of what the Alliance now called the Mixed Environment Combat Unit. For the first time, humans would teach other species how to use their own unique abilities better. Bob stood near the door, grinning as he watched the alien students try to copy James's steady stance. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. "Aliens actually wanting to learn from Deathworlders." Emily Parker walked in, carrying new training materials she had helped create. Her work studying alien biology had been key to making this program possible. "They're starting to understand," she said. "Every species has strengths. Humans just needed a chance to show ours." James picked up his training rifle, the same one he'd used to make the impossible shot. The students watched closely. They had all seen the recordings of that day, spreading across the galaxy's networks. One shot that changed everything. "Being strong isn't what makes humans special," James told his class. "It's knowing when and how to use that strength. On Earth, we learned it the hard way." Director Wilson arrived with more news. "The Pure Space Movement's leaders are facing trial," she announced, "and 17 more worlds have requested human defense advisors. They want to learn from us now." James nodded, remembering how far they'd come. Just months ago, humans were barely tolerated in space. Now they were valued allies, teachers, and protectors. "Show us how you made the shot," a young Verdant student asked eagerly. "The one that curved around the moon's gravity." James smiled. "First, you need to understand something. That shot wasn't just about math or strength. It was about believing in yourself when everyone else thinks something's impossible." He started teaching them about gravity calculations, about how Earth's harsh conditions had taught humans to think differently. The alien students took notes, their eyes wide as they learned how their own unique traits could be used in ways they never imagined. Later that day, James stood with his friends, watching the station's artificial sunset. Bob was telling new students about their adventures. Emily was explaining human biology to curious alien scientists. Even Admiral Hayes was there, proudly showing other Alliance leaders how humans had improved their space security. "Did you ever think it would turn out like this?" Emily asked James quietly. He looked at his sniper rifle, now a teaching tool instead of just a weapon. "Honestly, no. I thought we'd always be outsiders. The dangerous Deathworlders nobody trusted. And now? Now we're something better," James said. "We're proof that being different isn't a weakness. It's what makes us valuable." A group of students called him over, eager to learn more. As James walked to them, he heard them talking excitedly in different languages about human abilities, about their own species' special traits, about all the things they could learn from each other. The word Deathworlder was still used, But it had changed. Now it meant something else. Someone strong enough to protect others, wise enough to teach, and brave enough to prove that differences could make the galaxy stronger. James Matthews, the human sniper who had changed how the galaxy saw his species, began his lesson. And as he taught, he smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of humanity's true role among the stars.